Welcome to Talking with Tatchell. 2 days ago was Zimbabwe Independence Day. What should have been a cause for celebration was instead a cause for mourning and worldwide protests in Zimbabwe and here in Britain as well. In London, Zimbabwean exiles and their supporters led protests outside Downing Street and Parliament to demand an end to Robert Mugabe's misgovernance and to call for democracy, human rights and social justice in their homeland. The whole of the last year has been a period of escalating resistance to Mugabe's regime, followed by intensifying repression. With me to discuss the ongoing struggle to ensure a free and independent Zimbabwe is the national coordinator of the Zimbabwe National Students Union, ZINASU, Washington Katema. Welcome, Washington.
Yeah, thank you, Peter.
I'm very pleased that you're here, but I'm very saddened that your president could not be with us today. Can you explain what happened?
Yeah, sure. The president of Zimbabwe National Students Union, Promise Mokwananzi, was supposed to have traveled with me to Amsterdam, Brussels, and London, but unfortunately, he is on the hit list, state hit list, and the state was actually looking for him. So he had to go into hiding, and currently, as I'm speaking here, he is still in hiding from his own government.
And I understand that, you know, the big fear was that if he went to the airport to try to get on a flight, he'd be arrested like the MDC MPs were and dragged off and beaten and tortured.
Yeah, true. That has become a norm in Zimbabwe right now. The state brutality has reached unprecedented proportion in the modern history of any third world country, especially in Africa. It's shocking.
Can you just tell us a little bit about the students' unions, because your organization of students seems to be really now in the forefront, both of the struggle against the Mugabe regime and also on the receiving end of unprecedented repression. Can you tell us a little bit about that? You know, what kind of things have been happening to ZINASU?
Yeah, as students in Zimbabwe, students of Zimbabwe, we've realized that we are citizens before we are students. We are the voice of the voiceless, and we need to play a role in the overall democratization process in Zimbabwe. And that is the reason why you have seen ZINASU being part and parcel of the broader picture. That is the reason why you have seen ZINASU working hand in glove with other pro-democratic forces in Zimbabwe, notably National Constitutional Assembly, Zimbabwe Congress of Trade Unions, Crisis in Zimbabwe Coalition, and all the opposition forces in Zimbabwe. It's a strategy to come together and make sure that we come up with effective strategy to make sure that the people of Zimbabwe are liberated.
It seems like what you're saying, that really the youth of Zimbabwe is now really in the forefront of the struggle, and that you're also, for that reason, in the forefront of the repression. Can you tell us a little bit about, you know, what's happened to other student leaders in recent times in terms of beatings, arrests, detention without trial, and so on?
Yeah, I think 2007 will go down the lane of history as the year in which more student leaders, more youth activists have been subjected to criminal environment of police cells. This year alone, we have witnessed more than 300 cases of arrest, arbitrary arrest, and students have been arbitrarily beaten, they've been harassed, and there is no sight, there's no possibility that this might come to an end. What we are seeing is the acceleration of the brutality.
And how do you see change potentially coming about? And what, in your view, are the prospects for change? You know, is Mugabe so entrenched? Is the police state so strong that it's going to be surviving for quite a while yet? Or do you think we're on the verge of a rupture where, even within the ruling coalition and the military and police, there are people who are going to switch sides and come over to the opposition?
Yeah, Peter, authoritarianism is a pathology against which every humankind has a tendency to rebel against. And history is awash with the dictators who have once lived and who thought they will not one day fall down. And the same situation is going to happen in Zimbabwe. It's only a matter of time. In as much as of now, the state machinery, it seems it's still intact, but no, most of these key government institutions are also in shambles. It's only that the CIOs, the Central Intelligence Organization, has taken over the country affairs, and that is the reason why we are seeing sort of a deception.
I think a lot of people were hoping that through the Zimbabwe Congress of Trade Unions, that calls for mass stayaways and general strikes might be a means to mobilize the population and to bring down the regime. But sadly, the last big stayaway a couple of weeks ago, it was successful to some degree, but not as successful as many had hoped. I mean, what's your feeling about the possible power or role of the trade unions?
Yeah, the trade unions still remains a critical component in the Zimbabwean body politic. But as you know, the government is continuing to turn the wheels of injustice. They are continuing to close down on all the democratic spaces through promulgation of nefarious and obnoxious laws like Public Order and Security Act. And the government is solely surviving on repression, brutality, and anarchy.
I mean, how much longer do you think the government can survive?
I don't have clear time frames, but the regime is about to reach to its the struggle in Zimbabwe is about to reach to its logical conclusion. Very soon we are going to see change in Zimbabwe.
I think, you know, a while back when there was a party, a ZANU-PF party meeting about a month ago, there was hope and expectation that an ultimatum would be issued to Mugabe to stand down, but in the end it didn't happen. I mean, what's your take on the likelihood of rival factions within ZANU-PF, the ruling party, or maybe the military or police rebelling and instituting some kind of either overt military coup or police coup or some kind of internal palace revolution within the ruling governing party?
Oh, that is unlikely from my own opinion. It seems that the both factions within the ZANU-PF, the Mujuru faction and the Mnangagwa faction, are equally undecisive and unorganized. They are disorganized. And the other problem we are seeing in Zimbabwe is the government is being viewed by the ruling elite, all of them, as a vehicle to rob and terrorize innocent people. And actually what one sees in Zimbabwe is a government by deception, an artificial government run by a phalanx or a cabal of degreed bandits, intellectual hyenas, crocodile liberators, quack revolutionaries. So there's a problem actually to think that the liberation of Zimbabwe will come from or within the people who are currently in power. It's pretty impossible.
Let's say Mugabe was deposed. Do you think things would be any different, say, if one of his cronies from within ZANU-PF, is there anybody in ZANU-PF who might actually come to power and actually change things?
ZANU-PF is no longer a political party. ZANU-PF is now a culture. It's now a system. So we need sort of regime change. And when I say regime change, I'm not saying we need ZANU-PF to go, but what we need is the whole system to be revamped, reoriented. We need to come up with proper governance systems. We need to come up with proper constitution, which is democratic and people-driven. We need to come up with a government for the people, by the people, which respects and protects all fundamental and human rights. That is what we want.
Are you saying then that you actually think there are some good people in ZANU who might actually be persuaded to change or be part of the solution?
Some of them ran away. We used to have some people like Skosana Moyo who were in ZANU-PF. We used to have some people like Simba Makoni who are still in ZANU-PF. But by and large, most of the people in ZANU-PF are same rubbish in different containers. Both they are men of spaghetti spine. They fail to stand up and be counted. They fail to stand up and speak out against Mugabe. So I'm starting to doubt their capacity and capability to deliver.
And in terms of the opposition, I mean, a lot of people who defend or apologize for the Mugabe regime, including some in other African liberation movements, say that the MDC is just a front for the white farmers and it's just a tool for Western interests. What's your take on that?
Yeah, as ZINASU, we are non-partisan but political. In my personal view, I think that is a pathological lie. That is hogwash. Simply because MDC's agenda resonates with the agenda of the ordinary people in Zimbabwe. The people in Zimbabwe are facing chronic and hunger. You see, they are living in abject and chronic poverty. Even for us students, since 10 February 2006, when the government introduced a new fee structure, we have witnessed unprecedented levels of college dropout. The cases of student victimization, it's unbridled, it's uncontrollable. So what we want is food on the table. What we want is democracy. What we want are human rights, transparency, accountability. That is what we want. Those are basic democratic tenets or principles, rather.
And you're confident the MDC can deliver that?
As of now, looking into their manifesto, I think they have the capacity to do that. What we need to do is to address the structural problems we are facing in Zimbabwe. And the root cause of the crisis besetting our motherland is of a fundamentally flawed constitution. So first and foremost, we need to come up with a people-driven democratic constitution and come up with a framework which will protect anyone in power to abuse power. You see, what we are witnessing is excessive power centralized in the hands of a single person. Absolute power corrupts absolutely. That we must fight against, and we must have checks and balances to make sure that whoever takes over from Mugabe will foster a culture of democracy so that we have sustainable democracy.
In terms of moving forward in that process, let's say there was, eventually some change. I mean, what kind of ideological position or political position is ZINASU advocating? I mean, are you looking for sort of a pluralist model on say Western Europe, or are you looking for a more revolutionary model?
I think what we want is a sort of liberal democracy, premised on social justice, the respect for rule of law, access to basic commodities, freedom of speech, freedom of expression, freedom of assembly, and freedom of association. That is what we want. Those basic rights which are in the International Bill of Rights.
Yeah. What about the crucial issue of land reform? I mean, I was involved in supporting Zionist struggle in the 1970s, and I've always believed that the redistribution of land and wealth is a crucial part of a just and democratic society. I don't disagree with land reform, but obviously I disagree with the way it's been done, the terror, the murder, the mayhem. I think we see in South Africa now, there is a simmering crisis because the ANC government has failed to address the land issue. I'm just wondering how you see that being dealt with, because as we know, most of the land reform has gone into the hands of Mugabe's cronies. It hasn't been distributed to the rural poor. It's gone to ZANU-PF cadres and their families and government officials and military chiefs and so on. So what's your take on the land issue?
Yeah, on the land issue, I think the issue, the idea, the concept of land issue or land redistribution, it's a noble one for any African, especially the landless peasant farmers. But now the way in which the land redistribution was done in Zimbabwe was sudden, chaotic, and political, and there was no land redistribution in Zimbabwe. It was actually transference of land from Mr. Smith to Mr. Minister. You see, that is what we witnessed in Zimbabwe. Otherwise, the poor of the poorest are still crowded in same arid and arid regions in Jombe, in Gokwe, in all those areas, Binga. People are still living there. There's still a shortage of land in Zimbabwe simply because of corruption. It's now a corrosive cancer in Zimbabwe.
I mean, can I ask you about your perspective on the role of South Africa in all of this? Because, as we know, during the anti-apartheid struggle, the ANC, which is now the government of the country, appealed for international solidarity and support to help their struggle for black freedom. But it's very interesting, and some would say shameful, the way now the ANC is refusing to give that solidarity to the freedom struggle in Zimbabwe. So they wanted international solidarity, but they're not prepared to give it to others. I mean, I supported the ANC struggle and was involved in the anti-apartheid movement for 20 years, but I'm extremely disappointed, to put it mildly, at the role of Thabo Mbeki and the ANC government. I think they've been quite shameful.
I think that is the biggest betrayal from the South African government and the people of South Africa. But in as much we really need to appreciate efforts like what COSATU has been doing as of late.
And that's the Congress of South African Trade Unions.
The labour in South Africa, yeah. They're doing quite well in as far as contributing to the democratization of Zimbabwe as a nation. But as for the South African government, I think they've done nothing, actually, which deserves mention. But I think the SADC initiative, it's a noble idea.
It's the Southern African Development Committee.
Exactly. It's a noble initiative, given the fact that it was for the first time when the countries in the Southern Africa Development Community sit down and discuss the crisis in Zimbabwe. And Mugabe openly accept that there is a crisis in Zimbabwe. And the appointment of Thabo Mbeki as a mediator between the ruling party and the opposition, it sends a clear message that all is not well in Zimbabwe and something needs to be done. So now the question is Thabo Mbeki serious?
Has he made a difference? You know, he said he's doing quiet diplomacy, but you know, where's the result?
Yeah, that is the problem we are facing. I think the problem with South Africa is the issue of blind racial support. You see, South Africa is quite aware that there are gross violation of human rights in Zimbabwe. South Africa is aware that there are more than 3 million Zimbabweans living in South Africa. South Africa
fled to South Africa.
Yeah, who fled to South Africa, seeking political and economic asylum. And they are quite aware of the situation in Zimbabwe. And the onus is on them to do something, to act.
Why do you think they're not acting?
I think, you know, South Africa is having their problems with the labor union. And as you are aware, the movement for democratic change is a labor-backed party. And I think if Thabo Mbeki try to be rational and moderate, the opposition in Zimbabwe will win, and that will set a bad precedence for the COSATU, which is the labor union in South Africa. So I think Thabo Mbeki is more comfortable with a reformed ZANU-PF rather than total regime change. Or, yeah.
Do you think it's also perhaps a misguided belief in loyalty to a person who was once a great liberation hero? I mean, Mugabe isn't anymore. He's turned into his opposite. I mean, Mugabe, as I always say, he's Ian Smith with a black face, only many times worse. But I suspect that a lot of it is about, you know, the mythology of the liberation struggle, and well, not mythology. It was a real liberation struggle, but you know, the old loyalties between, you know, liberation struggles in different parts of Africa. Do you think that's part of the reason why South Africa is reluctant to make a move?
Yeah, that is ANC. But you see, we must move. In Zambia, there was Kenneth Kaunda. He was from the liberation struggle. In Malawi, there was Banda. In South
Africa, a bad precedent. Hastings Banda kept on ruling until he was 93.
Yeah, and that is what we are witnessing in Zimbabwe. That is what we are fighting against in Zimbabwe. In South Africa, we had Nelson Mandela. He spent 27 years in jail, but he only served one term, and he resigned. He stepped down, and that is what...
And he too hasn't spoken out against the tyranny in Zimbabwe.
Yeah, he hasn't spoken out clearly like what others are doing in South Africa, the likes of Desmond Tutu or Mangosuthu Buthelezi. They have been very clear and loud on the crisis in Zimbabwe and the root cause and what needs to be done.
Can I put it to you that what I find so unconscionable about South Africa's position is that in 1960 in Sharpeville, 69 unarmed peaceful black protesters were shot dead by the South African police. A shocking, shocking massacre that provoked worldwide protests. In Zimbabwe, in the mid-1980s, in just one small region, in the space of 2 or 3 years, Mugabe massacred 20,000 innocent civilians, and the world didn't, utter a peep. So that, that massacre in Matabeleland of 20,000 civilians, it's the equivalent of a Sharpeville massacre every day for nearly 10 months. And, of course, that was a particularly excessive, massacre. But we know that these killings are happening all the time, opposition activists. And you just think to yourself, why is it that South Africa isn't speaking out? Having known the pain of such terrible injustice, why won't they speak out? Why won't they do something? Why don't they switch off the electricity?
Yeah, I think common sense has been murdered, and idiots is now rampaging with impunity, especially in South Africa. And as well in Zimbabwe. I actually don't know why they are not acting. I've tried to give you my reasons why they are not acting, but they need to do something. In as much we believe that it is only the people of Zimbabwe who must be their own liberators, but the role of South Africa is critical and crucial if we are to realize a new Zimbabwe, a democratic Zimbabwe.
I think you're right to bring it back to the struggle within the country by the people is crucial. International solidarity is important, but the struggle within is going to be the decisive one. Can we just focus it back on ZINASU again and what you are doing as an organisation to mobilise people to challenge the regime?
Yeah, as we know, our niche as Zimbabwe National Students Union is to defend academic freedom in Zimbabwe. And our mission is to champion and protect academic freedoms, autonomy of tertiary institutions, and education as a human right through engaging other critical stakeholders like the government and other strategic partners, students included being the major stakeholders. And as I've earlier said, that we have realized that we have got a role to play in the struggle for a new Zimbabwe.
Before you go on about it, can you tell us about what kind of attacks have taken place upon universities, on academic freedom, on student unions? What has the regime done to attack the student movement and the students of Zimbabwe?
The government have outlawed student activism, and students are not allowed to gather on college to address their grievances, like the student leaders addressing their constituents.
So freedom of assembly has been axed.
And the students used to sit in the university councils and university senate. Those are decision-making boards for all universities. But as of late, the students were being chased away. They have been evicted from those meetings, and it's a worrying development in as far as institution democracy is concerned. And even the high fees which are being charged in colleges, it's a clear attack on our right to education.
So you're saying the student fees have been increased?
Yeah.
By how much? Or
by more than 2,000% since last year. Students used to receive loans and grants from the government, but the government has since scrapped all that. And I think it's a demobilizing strategy. They've realized that the students are getting more and more organized, and their role in the overall democratization process has been more louder and clear.
So has this forced many poorer students to drop out of college?
Yeah, more than 31.5 out of 260,000 students dropped out of college.
So 31,000 and a half?
31.5%. So that will come up to around 47,000 students being forced out of college as a result of high tuition and accommodation fees.
A third of tertiary students have been forced out because of these huge hikes in fees.
Yeah, yes.
And effectively, destroying, the future intellectual base of the country.
Yeah.
And what about actual harassment and intimidation and arrest of student leaders and student activists? You said that the assemblies are banned, the participation in the councils are banned. What else is going on?
For example, the current president, Mukwanan's situation. This year alone, he has been arrested on more than 37 occasions for no apparent reason, for simply mobilizing students to demand their access, their right to education. We have many cases of students being tortured, being abducted, and being dumped in game parks where there are lions, where there are cheetahs, in the middle of the night. That is the situation in Zimbabwe. The government is very clear. They don't want anyone to speak out against the current state repression, the current madness in Zimbabwe.
And in terms of how students are coping, I mean, what happens to all these students who've been forced out of university education and higher education?
Most of them are illegally finding their way into South Africa. They are swimming across a crocodile-infested Limpopo River. Some of them are going to Botswana and they are being deported. They will be first subject to, again, brutality in the hands of the law enforcing agents in those countries. That is the situation in Zimbabwe right now, and that is the situation within the students' fraternity.
So what happens to those who are caught by the Zimbabwe police and military when they're arrested? What happens to the students? What kind of things happen to them in detention? Explain, tell people what happens.
When you get arrested, like in Zimbabwe, a student, first and foremost, they will try to make sure that no one locates you for around 48 hours. So during that time, you'll be subjected to vicious and wanton assaults. You'll be denied access to
what kind of assaults? How will they do this?
They will be beating you with open fists, rubber truncheons, open hands, and they will deny you access to your legal representation. They will deny you access to food. They will deny you access to water. They will deny you access to medical attention, among those basic things.
But what about sexual assaults? Because we're hearing increasing reports of detainees being sexually abused by their police and CIO captors.
Yeah, I've heard that, but as of now, they still remain unconfirmed reports. But yes, I have heard something like that, but we don't have solid empirical evidence to substantiate that. But as for beatings, torturing, I have gone through such an experience as of late. As I was arrested on the 13th of March 2007 at the Harare Magistrate Courts for singing the national anthem in solidarity with the arrested civic society and opposition leaders, and to spend 3 days in police custody.
Yeah. Well, it's a shocking story, and I thank you for being with us to share it. I'm really pleased to meet you, Washington. We wish you good luck in the ongoing struggle to ensure, at last, freedom, democracy, human rights and social justice in Zimbabwe.
Thank you.
Please join us next week for another edition of Talking with Tatchell.